Didn't get any exercise.
So why does it, I was over so you can circle on the screen or whatever.
I would guess it's probably 75.
Well, you got a teleprompter, you can write on it. No, he said they.
Oh, yeah, I know. Happy anniversary there, Jack. Golf was it all day?
All day.
I bet it felt like all week.
Well, that'll be next year when it's 30. That'll might be the whole month of it.
Yeah, that probably will.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
We gotta pick you up every time they knock you down.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been here digging around.
Oh, and she was.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yes.
Me too if I lie.
Let's call this special workshop meeting to order. Oh, I'm sorry about it. Let's call this special workshop meeting to order. Council, you have a copy of the agenda for tonight's workshop, and you have, anyway, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion, second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. The only topic we have on here tonight is for the FY20 budget discussions, and we do have a closed session for tonight, and we'll do that about halfway through recess and convene a closed session and then come back. All right, so this time I'll turn it over to Dr. Woodruff to discuss the budget.
Mayor and Council, thank you very much for coming out this afternoon. It's a beautiful spring day. What we'd like to do is begin with one of the budget notes that you asked from last meeting, and that was an update on the water and sewer rate model. As you know, last year we hired a consultant to prepare a model, and part of the requirement of the project was to train our personnel so that we could keep the model and the rates up to date ourselves, thereby avoiding the necessity of constantly hiring a consultant. So knowing that I'm definitely not a model, you can laugh later or now, it's up to you. The Finance Department and Public Works Department are the folks who really take care of the model. Sabrina, Gail, Wally, and Alan have worked the model, and what we'd like to do is take a few minutes to look at the outcome as we see it for the coming year. So gentlemen, if you would. Alan?
Okay. What I'd like to start with is some model assumptions that we have in the model for this year. We have entered in the FY19 amended budget for FY19 expenditures at a little bit over $16 million, and that's operating expenditures. The FY20 budget is entered in for the expenditures for FY20 at $14.9 million. We escalate all of our expenses anywhere from 1.5 to 4% based on category-specific indices. So that's escalating them through the 10-year window that you'll see in just a few minutes on the panel. We projected our volume growth in water and sewer to be at a -1% per year in the model. And then the proposed CIP that was distributed to the council a few weeks ago has been modified before it was input into the model to reflect decreases in the North Carolina Department of Transportation projects. So here, this chart will show the number of meters, the volume of gallons, and the revenue over the past 4 years, and then the estimate that we have for 2019. And you can see that the meters have modestly increased, as well as the gallons of volume. And the revenue has increased. The increase from 2018 to 2019 is due to the 2.25% increase that we implemented last year upon council approval. Here are the same information for sewer, the sewer meters, the volume of usage, and the revenue for the 4 years, 2015 through 18, and our estimate for 2019. Again, you can see that there's some modest growth in the meters and in the volume, and the increase between 2018 and 19 on the revenue is attributable to the 2.25% increase that we had last year.
One of the things you might have caught is that the number of water customers and the number of sewer customers are a little different. Would you go back to the water a moment? You'll notice, what's that, 21,900, and then on the sewer, 20,865. We'd remind you that we share some customers with Onwassa. Most of the shared customers, though, are on the water side. But we do have sometimes multiple meters. Sometimes we have a meter that is not necessarily connected to a sewer account.
Okay. So we ran the model, and here's the panel. We showed this to you last year, and you can see that we have our base year of fiscal year 19, and then the 10-year window of FY20 going through FY29. The top blue line shows the constant increase that council agreed to last year of 2.25% per year. And then the next green line is running the model with just-in-time rate increases. So you'll see in FY20, the model is indicating no rate increase, but that will be followed up in FY21 with an almost 5% increase, some modest increases for years 22 through 25, and then in FY26, you would have a 22% increase and about a 3.5% increase in 27. Those rate increases are in order for us to meet revenue projections that we have and debt coverage ratios, as well as fund balance coverage that we have. The next 4 sections where we have the senior debt service coverage and the senior debt service coverage, including our 20% surplus, we've established in the model a minimum and a target rate for that. The minimum rates for these are really established by the rate covenants in our bond documents. So for these 2 debt service coverages, the minimum is 1.2, and our target we set is 1.5. The all debt service coverage and the all debt service coverage, including our 20% surplus, is all the debt service that the water and sewer has. And the minimum set by rate covenants for those two is 1.0, but the target we have in the model is 1.25. So you can see in the yellow square, the 2.25% increase in FY21 is not meeting our target. It's at 1.24, so it's highlighted yellow by the model. If we actually fall below the minimum of any of those rates, then that square will turn red and indicate that we need to look at the model a little bit more closer. So it's an intuitive model where it can let us know where we're not meeting some of our ratios. The last 4 lines down on the bottom is showing our average water and sewer bill for a 6,000 gallon customer on both the 2.25% in the blue and the just-in-time rates in the green. And then the bottom section is showing the minimum bills for the 2.25 and the just-in-time rates as well. The last slide that I want to show you is our fund balance. This is one of our key financial ratios that we track. So you can see the black line indicates our target, and it's set at around $10 million, which is about 8 months of the operating expenses in the water and sewer. You can see that the current plan of the 2.25% and the green plan of the just-in-time rate, we actually start spending our fund balance because we're cash funding all the CIP projects. And then by the year 2025, we're close to our target there. And you can see in 2026, the 2.25% actually dips below our target because that's a constant rate that we have set in there. And if you remember back on the previous slide here, the rate increases in FY 25, 26, and 27 of 1.01, 22.19, and 3.38 are helping us achieve the minimum target level there of that fund balance of around $10 million. So that's what those rate increases are doing there in the just-in-time rate. So that's what I have on the model there.
Go back to the first slide in the model, that panel right there. As you'll recall, last year we showed you the model. We recommended to you that you establish a program of consistent rate increases year by year, thereby avoiding a very large rate increase in the future. That's a policy decision that council needs to make every year. Obviously, you cannot bind yourself. I suppose you can bind yourself, but you can't bind the future council. But we would continue to recommend that the coming budget have a 2.25% rate increase in it, thereby avoiding a very large rate increase several years away. Can we answer questions or further explanation for you?
Still shows that we'll have to at some point, if that holds true, then we'll have to do something at some point when we get 2025, 2026, somewhere in that, probably 25, get ahead of it, so.
One thing that, as Alan mentioned, the DOT projects, if you'll recall, the mayor met several, maybe 2 months ago with Senator Brown, Representative Cleveland, Representative Shepherd, to discuss the current funding formula in the state law where the city has water and sewer lines in a DOT road. That bill, which they agreed to work to modify, which would substantially reduce our cost, is not factored into these rates. While it has received favorable hearings, it has not yet been adopted. If that occurs, then you will see several $1 million of potential cost over the next 3 to 4 years be substantially reduced. Now, at this point, what we would do is continue to assume that the numbers we have been told most recently are the accurate numbers. But even with that reduction in numbers from the previous down to what we were told earlier this week, if we are favorable with getting the legislation passed, we will see those numbers come down even further. So we will keep you informed on that. Wally, you have any further update on that?
That's correct. I know the legislation really would make a several $1 million difference, even at what's proposed for the 50%.
I have a question. Why at the very beginning, why are you assuming a decrease in meters from 19 to 20? Go back.
Can you go back?
From 18 to 19.
I think just to be conservative, You're talking
Like, yeah, going down from 22.
from 22.025 to
Right.
21.9. I think that was just to be conservative in the projections.
We use the meter count in the month that we update the model, and I believe that some of the meters have probably been shut off because of damage.
The other thing that,
Sabrina's shaking her head yes. so.
I believe that we updated it in December, so I think that might have been a December count. And we've had quite a few shut off after this one.
the other thing that we found interesting is that the consumption model from the industry on how many gallons per day a person consumes has significantly dropped. Wally, I believe you have some information on
I
that?
do. What we've read that nationally they've looked at household water consumption, and in the 1990 timeframe they updated every 5 years. In 1990, that average was 105 gallons per person per household per day. And the 2015 numbers were 83 gallons per person per household per day. So and that trends from what we've seen historically with consumption across the city. So while the 1% reduction won't continue in perpetuity, because obviously we'll get to a point where all of the appliances and things are as energy and water efficient as they can be, where we are following what the trend is.
If you have, hopefully, people are bathing as often as they used to bathe, and they're, staying in the showers a long time. But I don't know whether you've purchased a washing machine lately.
And a dishwasher.
A dishwasher or a clothes washer. The amount of water that they now consume is just significantly less. And those are the type of innovations we're seeing in the industry that is creating conservation so that the actual consumption model is going down.
And the toilets are lower flow now, and some toilets even have options of, a small flush or a larger flush, depending on what you need. So those are trends that while at some point we'll get as conservative as we can be, we're trying to follow what we're seeing in actual usage also. And obviously, if there's less usage, that means that we still have to cover our debt, or just means higher costs.
From an Onawassa standpoint, have y'all met to discuss any rate increases for the coming year?
Not yet.
I mean, I know last week when we met, I discussed that I had heard from Mr. Hudson certain things, but again, that's not mine to share. But I would assume in the next several weeks, the Onawassa Board will be discussing budgetary issues.
Yes. I think we had a message come out today, but we haven't discussed that yet.
Anything you want us to follow up on with more information on your water and sewer model? Well, actually, Sabrina and Gail are very disappointed because they put the two guys up here to speak, and they were going to be the backup with all questions. You sure you don't have any questions for Sabrina or for Gail?
I think what we talked about last year, no questions, but was that we would look at it annually when we made that commitment and make sure that the model was moving along the right path and that we would adopt it year by year. And it's obviously on track.
So if you follow all your conservation information, your gallon cost per water is going to increase then, right?
That's correct. And that's part of the
But your
challenge.
expenditures probably will not.
Well, there are two things that
I
are
imagine
favorable.
you're not gonna,
Well, I don't know that the challenges that water and sewer industry as a whole continues to see increases. And I don't remember, I can't quote what the statistics are, but if I remember right, they're 3 to 5%. And in some years, admittedly, when we do capital projects And so there's projects that we've canceled or pushed out just because by the time we get them designed, permitted, it's a multiple year project. When we go to build, it's not a good bid time. So we'll sit on that project and wait until we see more favorable bids. But I can remember in, the 2006, 7, 8 timeframe, all the way up to maybe 9, we were begging for bidders. We would get one bidder on a project, and then shortly after when we hit the recession, we had very competitive bids where you had 7, 8, 9, 10 bids from companies that never would have even submitted, large companies. So some of this is cyclic and, it's hard to predict 10 years in the future. So, we're basing it, we can make, we don't want to make commitments now for something 10 years in the future, but we do want to try to predict and guide where we are with incremental increases before we have to suffer the 20% that we had last time.
Let me also point out a couple of things. You'll remember that due to a court case, we have a new state law.
Yes.
This model is in keeping with the state law because that law requires us to have a 10-year capital improvement program.
Correct.
And obviously, we have now system development fees instead of facility fees. Two other good pieces of note that I think will help us on rates in the future. One is the work that Wally and Joe and a lot of other people have been working on relative to the aquifer study. We have very good results from the Black Creek Aquifer Study. Dr. Spruill and others have worked on our behalf. We have been meeting with the regulators, and we believe that the last reduction in consumption is not going to be required. The last reduction in withdrawal is not going to be required. I would think that we would know affirmatively or finally on that in the next 60 days, do you think?
I think it'll take longer than that because we're still gathering. I mean, we have verbal that we will not have to take the last withdrawal reduction, but we still have information that we're required to submit, which requires us to go out and physically pull some of our wells, and that does take time. So, matter of fact, we have a project that we're working on now to get the advertisement out to do some of that work.
What, is there a required minimum on your fund balance as far as water and sewer fund?
Is it, do our, debts?
Debt rate
debt-
coverage.
It's on your
debt-
debt, based on your debt ratio?
Yeah, they do require.
We'll get you a note on that.
I don't think there's a fund balance requirement, there's a revenue requirement. Your revenue has to exceed your debt
Yes.
coverage by
What is that
one.
percentage?
It has to meet it by one
1.25?
one coverage, but then you can use 20% of your fund balance and you have to be able to cover it by 1.2. So your fund balance, I guess, would have to be 0.2 of your debt service.
That's why the 1.24 is in yellow.
Correct.
Yes. Getting close.
But then you'll see the next year it's not. So
Right.
we weren't too concerned about that.
Any other thoughts or questions? Gentlemen and ladies, well done.
Good to see you, Sabrina.
On the budget notes, pardon me, relative to the history of the 4-cent fund, in '97, the Community Summit talked about where you want the community to be. Now, I think everybody sitting around the table, except probably me, was here in '97. So you will recall those days. And the summit said that a lot of community improvements should be made. It was repeated in other sessions. And from that, the council initiative, which we commonly refer to as our capital reserve fund, was started. It was started with 4 cents of tax money. It has funded a number of projects. You know, you can't look around Jacksonville without seeing a project that has been funded by the 4-cent reserve. Portions of the Museum of the Marine, portions of the Vietnam Memorial, and a lot of other things have been funded through this capital project fund. As far as the debt service, we mentioned before that it brings in about $1.4 million a year. And as Gail pointed out last time, we still have some debt, but not a lot. I believe it's about $118,000. So that's not bad, because that means about, maybe about 8% of your income, she loves when I do math in public, is for debt. And that's a good position to be in. Last year, when we discussed the budget, we talked about beginning to really build the reserve to $1 million. And last year, we began doing that. We currently have a very nice fund balance of about $700,000 to $800,000 in that fund. We certainly never anticipated the hurricane, and we did not anticipate some of the challenges financially that we're facing this year. The reason why we wanted to build a reserve was the council and the community may come across a major project one day that you would like to do. And I would like to leave the city in a financial position where you're not long-term in debt. I don't think it's a good thing to have 20 years worth of debt in your capital reserve. It's one thing to have 20 years worth of debt in your water and sewer fund. But when it comes to the place where you build parks and recreation and build parking lots and those type things, I would hope that you would be able over the years ahead not to get into long-term debt for that. Long-term debt is going to restrict you. So our goal last year, which may be a difficult goal to achieve this coming year, is to continue to build that 4-cent reserve. The impact, if we do take the 800 megahertz system out of that, that would mean you would redirect about $662,000 from the 4-cent, the new money, and put it towards that debt. Now, the mayor asked the question, okay, what projects in the next year, 2 or 3 in the capital projects would we see delayed if we directed that $600,000 payment? Because it's not just one payment, it's 3 years in a row. Actually, I think it's a little bit in the 4th year. These are the major projects that would be delayed. Not all of them had been planned in FY20. Some of them would have been in 21, some of them would have been in 22. But, you know, the Bayshore Playground, the Commons Playground, Northeast Creek Restrooms and Shelter, you can read the list. And then, of course, Fire Station 3. Fire Station 3 in your capital projects is calling for a study in FY20. That money's left in the budget to study the building to determine, is it better to relocate and build brand new, or is it possible to simply retrofit the building? I know in discussions around this table, Mr. Bittner asked the question about, are we going to build, or when are we going to build a recreation facility over in the Bryn Mawr area? One of the things that we've thought about is if you do build a new fire station at a different location, maybe what you do is you retrofit Fire Station 3 into a fairly large community recreation facility where you could have aerobics and whatever. Obviously, it's not big enough to have pickleball tournaments or basketball, but those are the type of discussions that would come out of the $30,000 that's in the budget this year to do the study. Now, some of those you may look at them and say, you know, we just don't want to delay any of those projects. We want to delay some of them. Those are things you're going to have to decide. Remember, we could actually fund the $600,000 payment and all of these projects. But what you're doing is you're not building that reserve, and that becomes a philosophical policy question that you will decide before the budget is up. You may decide that, no, you want the 800 megahertz to come somewhere else, and you want all of these, and you want to build a reserve. But there's just a set amount of money, and you'll need to decide, are you gonna do option A, option B, option C? But I would say to you, from the manager's standpoint, these are projects that I would recommend that you consider delaying and that you take the 800 megahertz payment out of that reserve. But again, that's a policy decision for you. Any questions on these projects before we go to the next note?
Somewhat related, but the 800 megahertz system, are we the only two contributors to the cost of that system?
Yes, sir.
County and the city?
Yes, sir. Now, in fairness, the county does have 100% in their budget for the continued maintenance. This is principal and interest debt. And the nice thing about it is there are only 4 payments. We also talked about wellness. We have not had a chance to meet with our wellness consultant yet on the conversations that the mayor had. He is coming in town this week, and we're going to have more discussions on that. The only thing is, it cannot be implemented in this coming year. It would be a year away. Why is that? Because with the approval for the premium increase, it is now time for us to lock the plan in place so that we can move forward with getting everybody signed up for the various programs that they're going to participate in. Recommendation is that we continue. We really stress things such as exercise options, nutrition counseling, our smoke-free goals, blood tests, those type ththings. But we will keep you posted on that.
Also check on that possibility of tiered plans.
Yes, sir. That's one of the things we'll be discussing with Mr. Eastep when he's in this room. On the budget summaries, Gail, if you would.
This is the general fund revenue projections. It shows the FY19 amended compared to what we're proposing for FY20. As we've discussed, the taxes are down just a little bit, the sales tax and the property tax. The unrestricted intergovernmental remains very steady. Restricted intergovernmental is up just a little bit, and charges for services are down just a little bit.
I remind you on the ad valorem taxes, we originally thought $110 million worth of loss. We are pretty comfortable that the tax base will go down about $80 million. And therefore, that $80 million did result in a reduction in your revenue from taxes. Also, I would remind you on sales tax, while the sales tax has increased, when the county raised their property taxes last year, remember that changed the amount of money in the distribution formula, and we lost $450,000 of sales tax because the county raised their property tax. Now, I will also say to you, we have no idea what the county is going to be doing in their budget for the coming year. If you listen to the school board meetings and the meetings between the school board subcommittee and the Board of County Commissioners subcommittee, you may see another attempt at raising the ad valorem tax rate at the county again. And if that does happen, it will again have a negative impact on sales tax distribution. So that's, when you look at those numbers, that's those first two are where we get the vast majority of our operating revenue, and you can see that's those are down. Ready?
And then borrowing this year is up a little bit. That is borrowing to finance vehicles and equipment. Currently, the fund balance appropriation is 2.1 to balance this budget as it is. And all of the revenues are up slightly. And then the overhead allocation, if you'll remember, is where we allocate expenses to the water sewer fund, the stormwater fund, and the sanitation fund for this, from the city manager's office, human resources, finance, for the services we provide to them. And then this is just a history of the general fund balance. As you can see, we've been building it up over the years. FY19, the current full year estimate says we're gonna go down about $1 million. That may or may not be. But compared to the current FY20 budget, that will be 34.1% of the budget for 20.
And again, we have spent somewhere over $6 million in hurricane recovery. And although we're going to get all of that money back, I'm sure, we just don't know what day the check will be in the mail. So that's why it's important to have those levels of fund balance. When it comes to how we spend our money, and you look at the proposed budget for FY20, and you look at how much comes from property tax, the number one responsibility of the city, from my perspective, is no different than the number one responsibility of federal government. That's provide protection. So it has been your philosophy to always budget police and fire out of ad valorem tax. So you can see that a little bit of ad valorem tax money goes to transfer to solid waste. But if you look at the overall pie, it looks blue and red. And of course, Mike Yanero likes blue and red. So, and he likes the slice of the pie to reflect quality service, and I think you will all agree that that's exactly what this community gets, is excellent service from the police and fire department, as well as from all city employees. So, any questions on the general information so far? Okay. Let's talk about outstanding general fund debt. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of it. The debt that you do have is water and sewer debt. But the general fund is in, I think, very good shape. Your buildings are getting paid off. And every year you can begin to, you see the trend where it continues and continues. And in the not too distant future, you're going to be out of debt except for the Sturgeon City building and the Center for Public Safety. And that's a pretty nice place to be in. Any comments you want to make on this?
Well, this does include vehicles and equipment, so that will remain. There are a couple, like you said, that will be falling off. But.
And of course, our philosophy on vehicle and equipment is we borrow either 3 years or 5 years, depending on, for example, like a garbage truck, we borrow for 5 years. Now, police car, do we do that for 3 or 5?
We do that for 3.
And that's because they're high mileage cars when we turn them in. Is that what you and Ron have come to an agreement with, Chief? A little inside humor there, folks. That's one of those discussions that, as the manager, I always say, that doesn't need to come up to my level. So, very glad. So, the proposed schedule, what we would like to do this evening, if you're comfortable, is to begin to look at some of the department budgets, move through that, if possible, next week, continue with that, reminding everyone that May the 7th, we'd have another workshop, but also May the 7th, we'd have the public hearing, not to adopt the budget, but so that the public can come and give any comments that they want about things that are like in the budget or so forth. So are you comfortable going back and starting some of the department reviews?
Yes.
Okay. I believe you all have your iPads with you. And I'd like to suggest that you...
These are not going to be in the same order.
Yeah, these are not going to be in the same order necessarily as the book, but let me explain to you why.
Dr. Washington.
Rather than go through these budgets page by page, there's so little change in the budget that I'm not so sure that's a good use of your time. Every one of your budgets has had an impact from the North Carolina Retirement System decision. Every one of your budgets has had an impact from the insurance, whether it's our property and casualty insurance or whether it's health insurance. Every one of the budgets has been impacted by electricity. Any budget that has a vehicle has been impacted by fleet charges that have gone up. And then, of course, your budget and any budget that's in this building, any departments in this building has been impacted by City Hall maintenance. So when you look at these first 5 budgets, you can see that the mayor and council's budget has gone up. Yes, it went up $27,000. I can tell you the vast amount of that is because of the expenses of this building.
Definitely weren't salary increases.
It definitely was not salary increases. When you look at livable neighborhoods, community engagement, and legal, you can see modest changes, but they were all because of those 5 things that I just mentioned. When we put together the budget this year, it's the same message that we give the department heads every year. Don't ask for things that you know we can't afford. Give us honest budgeting. And I'll refresh your memory, we have department issues. So if you really need something new, then it's a department issue. You'll also notice that we're coming up in November with a mandatory city council election. I believe we have the mayor and 2, is that correct? The mayor and 2. 3 elections ago, we were budgeting $36,000. We're now, this is a number given to us by the county elections. It's looking like almost $80,000. So, now whether we will actually spend that much, but that's what's in your budget. Do you want to go into any detail on any of those 5 budgets? You can see how little change there is.
As long as Randy's gotten the big book, huh?
I saw in mayor and council, there was a line item for training. It seemed like a considerable amount. Does that ring a bell to anybody? I mean,
It's travel and training.
Oh,
for
travel and
thing-
training, okay.
Travel and training for the council. We have several council members who are very active at the league, at the National League, and several that are active at the North Carolina League, and that's reflected in that.
I knew it wasn't training because we're untrainable.
I will not touch that, sir.
What is our increase?
it was just a figure I noted. It said training and I didn't. I knew
It's
most of
travel-
us have spouses, so we
travel
didn't need
training.
training.
The same on the city manager, community programs, passports, human resources, city clerk. I'll come back to passports in a second. All of those increases that you see through there are very modest, or they're directly related to the things that we mentioned on retirement and so forth.
Have you made any allocation movements?
We did make some allocation movements, but that wouldn't be reflected in the budget. It would be in the expenditure sides. It would be reflected in the revenue source. So for example, in the manager's budget, if last year I said I was going to spend 30% of my time on water and sewer, and this year I'm going to spend 25%, it would have changed the amount of money coming from the general fund, but it would not have changed the budget on the expenditure side.
Right.
Now, on passports, as you know, we are now fortunate and are generating right at $200,000 a year. We have some expenses coming up this year for additional supplies that we have to buy, and we buy them in bulk. And also, we give a very nice stipend to the ladies who participate. I believe we have, Carmen, 11
Yes.
11 passport agents, and we give them, in addition to their regular compensation, we give them an additional stipend. One of the reasons why the stipend has actually gone up this year is that in Mike's area over at the Center for Public Safety, the ladies over there were, when we first started, doing about 500 passports a year. And your stipend is directly related to how many passport applications you're processing. Now, both the Center for Public Safety and City Hall are processing right at 2,000 applications a year each. So we're up to 4,000 applications, and with that, the stipend for the ladies at Center for Public Safety. But if you think about it, for a $36,000 investment, you're getting $170,000 or $164,000 of return. I think almost any of us around the table would say that that's, and the service level that these ladies give is just really amazing. As we mentioned, Mike had a passport fair over there about a month ago, and they processed enough for over $10,000 worth of application fees that the city kept in that one day. So you can see the benefit. Any of these departments you want to take a minute to look at? I know you want to deal with finance, and of course, Ryan is here with planning and permitting, and he was hoping that y'all would really want him to explain the $3,000 decrease that is in there. The one that we need to spend a little bit of time on, though, is your non-departmental and also in the police. Non-departmental, I need to confirm to you, that's where we also budget every year the $100,000 that you have pledged to the Dick Center. You know, when the crisis center was opened, each local government was asked to make a contribution. The county's making one, several other counties are making one, the city of Jacksonville. So in that budget, there is the $100,000 that you pledged there.
It was just a one-time.
It's actually an annual.
Annual.
Yes, sir, it's an annual operation.
What was the term on that?
It is a forever, as long as you approve it annually. Because like any budgetary matter, you can't bind the future. And so every year, it will be placed in your budget until you say to us, it will not be in the budget. But we want you to know that's where that $100,000 goes in the budget. John, did you?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you did it.
I was just saying, I saw you move to Carmen like, did he say the wrong thing? The other non-departmental, we do budget $200,000 a year as a contingency fund. We have not touched that $200,000 this year, even though we had a lot of other unexpected expenses. But we do try to keep that $200,000 in case something comes along that needs to be budgeted. Anything else in non-departmental you want to point out?
I think that the decrease here is the $250,000 that you pledged to cut out of the operating budget.
So will this go up by $250,000 then?
Well, no, the 250 decrease is already,
It's built in there.
is built in there. That's why the
Price
number
gone
went
down.
down.
Okay. And again, if you'll recall, we budget 100% in each department for salary, assuming there's no turnover at all. Then we do negative budgeting in non-departmental, knowing that there will be some salary savings. So, okay, thank you for that. When I pledge to you that we will recover $250,000, I can tell you we have already identified and have begun the process for about $175,000 of that. So I'm very comfortable that we will meet the commitment that I made to you of $250,000. And that's just in the general fund. That's not in any of the other funds. So, police department. Let's look at the police department budget. I believe that's on page 89. Mike, would you come up and join us? John, would you hand this to Mr. Pittman?
Oh, sure. We have more, we have more down here.
Yeah.
Here we go, Rich.
In keeping with the format, you can see on page 90, the revenues and the grants that we're expecting for the coming year. The overall budget for police department is right at $19 million. If you will look at the first line in operating with salary, you can see that that reflects the pay plan that you adopted this past year. You can also see that
Is that a little less than we anticipated?
no, remember, there was a fee or a cost to implement the plan, and then there's a cost to maintain the plan. And this is in line
Because
with
it's not
what
as
we-
high as increases. what we
That's
thought.
correct. The implementation was the large number.
Okay.
So. As you go down, you'll also notice the capital outlay, that's for the equipment. The separation allowance continues to be about $400,000. And remember, that's where you have a police officer who has not reached 62, but has reached the number of years that they can early retire. We have to pay the supplement. That is a number that I will say is a moving, think of it as a tunnel. And people are moving through that tunnel. For almost every person who moves out of the tunnel, there's a new person who moves into the tunnel. So the other thing is, this is one of those departments on salaries and benefits that really got hit by the mandatory increase in retirement contribution. So when
Can
you,
I ask you a quick question before you, why did we have such a drastic jump between 18 and 19 in that? Was there
well,
an adjustment made?
are you talking about in the separation allowance?
Separation fund.
Just depends on how many people are in the pipes.
So we just had a bunch that went in that pipeline that particular year?
Yes, sir.
Actually, what we do is we had to fold this fund into the general fund. It's a separate fund where we're setting aside money to fund future benefits. It's not a true
No,
trust.
it's not a net number.
every year.
No, it's not a trust, so we can't decrease our liability because it's not protected from creditors.
How do you project what you're putting in?
It's an actuarial study that's
Oh,
done
okay,
every
same
year.
way. Okay.
Now, you were talking about the effect of the retirement system increase. That's different than the
That's so-
separation,
Yeah,
right?
it's totally,
That's up here in the
That
salary
would be in
benefits.
salary and benefits.
okay. That's a separate fund altogether, right?
Yes. Now, I will also remind you that there is legislation that has been introduced that would create an early separation allowance fund for firefighters. That would cost the city several $100,000 in addition to this for police. I do not believe that that is going to be favorably looked upon by the state legislature, but I want you to know that's a liability out there that would be another unfunded mandate should the legislature decide that they were going to
What
approve
did you
that.
say our number was?
I believe it's a little over $300,000. I can go back and look at the, okay. Mike, anything in your budget that you want to point out here?
No.
What's the capital outlay decrease?
I think we went down on some cars that we've been trying to move those cars over a period of time. And I think some of that is the number of vehicles that we've ordered.
We try to keep that number pretty consistent though, so that we don't have, 15 cars bought one year and 30 bought the next year.
It's taken us a while to get to that, to flatten it out. Because we were buying like 3 years of cars and then we weren't buying any cars for a couple of years. So that's helped us reduce the amount of cars we're buying every year. We switch them around and
And sometimes we have more accidents in a year, and so therefore we'll buy replacement vehicles for vehicles that have been lost. And that sort of,
we've been managing the amount of miles. Somebody that lives closer, we'll switch that with somebody that lives a little bit farther out.
What is the regulations now in your take-home program?
If they're within the county, it pays for itself. If they're outside the county, they have to park it.
Yeah, if you go through Swansboro and you see the fire department area there, quite often you'll see several city police cars. And I had a citizen asked me one day, do you allow your city police officers to also work for Swansboro? And I thought, no. I said, well, I see a city police car there all the time. Well, the reason why is that person lives in Carteret County and has to leave a personal vehicle there. So,
I suspect that amended budget there is a rollover PO from the prior year where we had ordered
what?
cars, a rollover PO,
Rio,
like we had ordered them at the end of the year and they didn't come in until, that would be my guess.
but the capital outlay is primarily 95% vehicles.
Yes.
So
Mike did ask for additional personnel. It's not something that I would recommend due to the budget. Mike, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think the most important thing is the investment that you all have made in the STEP plan has enabled us to reduce our turnover rate. So I think that's helped tremendously with managing the call volume. So we've been extremely lucky about officers leaving. Now, we still have some, in fact, we have 3 that are probably leaving because of their spouses are being reassigned in the military. But we've been extremely pleased with the retention of our personnel due to that plan.
I think it's important for us to always not just recommend things to you, but also let you know, did it work? And I think the statistics are very clear. You're always going to lose people because of whatever. I mean, somebody, but we're very fortunate. We have a number of military spouses who have been working in the police department. We have, for example, you may know Becky, who is the chief secretary. Her husband got new orders and they're moving. Have a very fine female police officer, has been with us for 2 years?
3 years.
3 years. Her husband has gotten new orders. He's headed to Pendleton. So she's headed out there to move from the enjoyable job as a police officer in Jacksonville to the very challenging job of being a police officer in Los Angeles.
She was an LAPD officer and came to us. And actually, she didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay here with us, but, you know, she has to follow her husband. Now, one thing that we would like to take just a minute on, which is indirectly budgeted related, the Dix Crisis Center, we have talked about our contribution there. But I know that Mr. Thomas and Mr. Lazaro put a lot of effort into helping get the Dix Crisis Center up and running. We have a grant program that is, let me do that a little different. Getting into the crisis center and going through those 7 days is a step in the right direction. But it's not going to be successful without follow-up. There is a new grant program that does not cost the city anything. It doesn't cost us any match. All it does is cost us time of the chief and some of the staff. And we'd like to ask you tonight to let Mike spend just 3 or 4 minutes overviewing this and ask you if you'll give us approval to file the necessary grant. Because if you don't have follow-up, the people that come out of the Dix Crisis Center, their likelihood of recidivism is high. So Mike, if you give a quick overview. Sure, this is the comprehensive opioid abuse site-based prevention program. And it's for locally driven responses to the opioid epidemic. So the funds can be used as from the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Can be used for our LEADS program, which is our diversion program for first-time offenders. And it can connect families with treatment. It can also provide housing because a lot of those folks are coming out of that and they've exhausted all their resources and they need housing, they need treatment, they need more intensive treatment if they come out. Transitional housing, we'll also be able to focus on overdose fatality review team so that we'll look at these overdoses and hopefully make some more criminal charges for folks who are providing this poison to our citizens. So we've seen a steep increase in overdoses I think it's 69% in the last year. So this is just an opportunity. We can get up to $600,000. There's no match. And we think it's going to dovetail into opening the crisis center and providing those additional services. One of the suggestions that they made from PERF and the Vera Institute when they were here talking about our use of force was looking at case management and possibly hiring case management. So there's an opportunity for us for the next 2 years, if we got this grant, to contract some case management out so they can get those folks into treatment, work with them on transitional housing, and work with them on jobs, kind of like a reentry program for offenders.
See if we could also, once we get our report back to determine where the gaps are, maybe utilize some of that funding potentially.
Sure.
Based on what
Sure.
those results are, to fill some of those gaps.
And they're planning on that May 9th at 3 o'clock meeting. Carmen's going to send out an invite. And also, we're going to send out the draft report. It's not fully completed yet, but it does, it's a very interesting report, shows a number of gaps in our services. So we could effectively use it in the grant and then targeting those areas where they're suggesting that we plug those gaps in.
So you would contract for this service and a contractor would be responsible to you?
Yes.
Is this a one-time grant, Chief, or is this something to be renewable?
I think this is a one-time grant for 2 years, but we don't know if it will be renewable or not. Most of the DOJ grants are just for a 2-year period.
Depending on what comes.
So, John, we just need a consensus to do this, to resolve this?
Yes, sir, because of your council policy that y'all will always do, at least hear about the grants before it's applied and give your consensus or vote if you want to.
Agreed. Quick question.
Richard, you had a comment.
What I was gonna say, given the nationwide lawsuit which John has filed and we're part of, there is a likelihood that whatever settlement money comes out of that lawsuit could be in addition to the DOJ grant that is for a 2-year period. This is a nationwide epidemic. It's not gonna go away. The federal government is gonna provide a lot more money. This, though, is asking your approval to file the grant, no local match, no additional city personnel being hired, through a consultant. The case studies would be done with the understanding that if any of that changes, we have to come back to you.
Councilman Warden, you had?
Yeah, just, can you restrict that just to city residents?
I mean, obviously we would if.
You would, okay. I was just curious if there would be any restriction, if you would be allowed to restrict.
I mean, we would have control over that if we wanted to. I mean, the LEADS program is, we would, there will be county
That'd be to
residents.
anyone, though, that's not just a city resident.
Yeah, because if we get somebody that has small amounts of heroin or small amounts of an opioid, and we put them into the LEADS program, they may be a county resident, they may be just in the city doing.
Ron, you all right with that?
Yeah, I had a question, because I was looking at this House Bill 474 in terms, are you familiar with that?
No.
Because they were talking about death by distribution.
Oh, yes.
And I'm wondering, I'm trying to get an understanding is that what amount would be considered, because when you have drug addicts or even people, on heroin sharing needles, which are actually people that's already sick, how would that impact
Well,
them?
that's the overdose fatality review team. So that team would look at it and see who's culpable for that offense. Obviously, the person that's providing it would be the person that we would look for. And I'm talking a person.
Farther up the
that
chain in
sells
terms
meth.
of
Let's be like for hot shots and stuff like that. You talk about, like overdose type, where
Yes.
your distributor may have cut it
Right.
too bad.
And what they're doing right now is, one of the things that's really dangerous about it is they're substituting fentanyl for other types of drugs. They're making pills that look like Valium, that people would think that they would safe and take them, and they're laced with fentanyl.
And the Attorney General talked about that at the open house that we had, that he recognized that in this bill, it's targeted for the actual criminal acts. And he actually made that separation, that as users, it's recognized that they're just trying to
It's a sickness.
feed their illness, so to
Right.
speak, and there will be a system in place for that separation.
Yeah, I was
as
just
he indicated.
concerned about
Yeah.
a user sharing with a user and they get accused, you know, because they,
These are the people that actually
Right.
sell the drugs and
Right.
stuff.
okay, I got that. Thank you.
There maybe need a point of clarity on Mr. Warden's question about city residents. The chief does not deal with city residents, it's what happens in the city. It could be John Doe from Washington DC or whatever, and he's having to deal with whoever is here having the overdose, and then wherever the crime may lead, et cetera. So it's not city residents, but it's a city grant, it's not a county grant, correct, chief?
Right.
So it would apply to any instances that he could utilize it within the city.
So it would be if Jacksonville Police Department arrested or recommended somebody go in, that's what it would cover,
Right.
not somebody that one or the other, like a Carteret or
Oh,
a
no,
Crazy.
No.
that's correct.
It would be just the folks that we refer.
Okay.
We would do the case management
Yeah,
as they
okay,
come out.
That's kind of what I really meant,
I just
where
wanted to
it
clarify.
wasn't based on origin or whatever. I knew we had the other folks.
All right, Jerry, you were okay, right?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mike, anything else in your budget?
Bob, you okay with that?
Okay.
So there's
I do
your
have
direction.
I do have one question on we talked about 6 additional police officers. What did you intend with the part-time officer? What was your intention there?
Well, actually, the part-time officer, we were gonna utilize to work just the school zones, a traffic officer for just the school zones. So we thought if that was approved, then we could hire a retired officer to be in those school zones and work traffic in all those school zones. That was our thought with that particular officer. Given the situation that we had at Jacksonville High School and some other school zones, it would be good to dedicate an officer just to that, a traffic officer just to that.
Trouble is, you just talking about one officer.
Yeah, but the way that some of the schools are staggered and the additional traffic officers, it'll give us a little bit more capability to do that.
And that request was also filed prior to the excellent work that Anthony and others did relative to the improvements that are coming to
Right.
Jacksonville High School.
Right.
So I will say to you that we could certainly use the extra person on that. On the other hand, I think that the physical improvements that are coming, Anthony is here. Anthony, what is your current schedule, you think, for the DOT installing the Hawk system at Jacksonville High School?
We're shooting for late August at this point. The
So
goal
start-
is the start of school. I certainly hope we can meet that, but, things change. But the goal is late August. And we feel like the timeline supports that as of right now, assuming there aren't any unanticipated delays.
What's out there already been working for you?
It seems to be working now.
But it's hard to tell because of the construction. It really,
Construction-
everybody's
construction's
already
hard.
on alert.
We've continued to write traffic citations
They are, okay.
every single day, so.
Yeah, when it goes back to 5 lanes or 4 lanes, whatever, and everybody's just going full out, it'll change again.
It does appear that the rumble strips have helped a lot. Okay, so that does bring some additional physical awareness to the fact that something is different out there. Now, again, once the 5-lane section goes back in, we'll just have to wait and see, but hopefully shortly thereafter, we'll have that Hawk signal up and operational.
And that was really our thought with the part-time officer.
Just curious. Thank you.
Any other questions on the police budget?
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, could we take a break and then go into closed session, please?
Let's go ahead and recess the regular meeting and entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Oh, you know, I was.
So let's spending money instead.
I had
Oh, y'all was serious about this meeting.
like smile.
I had to be here.
Okay, we're live.
No, it's Thursday.
Okay, let's go ahead and,
Neither confirmed nor denied.
go back into session. We'll go back into session.
Can't see what we're doing.
Okay. I think we're ready. Okay.
Glenn, are we in session? If we are, send us a sign.
There we go.
Burning bush.
Okay. We've gone through a number of budgets this evening. There is a slide I'd like to move back to that shows the schedule. You can see that this evening we've gone through a number of these budgets. We've not covered all of them. But given the hour, we can either continue with some of these or we can adjourn until next Tuesday night and then pick back up. At that time, what we would need to do is, of course, begin with finance. We've covered police. With the fire department, one of our goals there is to talk with you about a possible pay plan for the fire department if it's going to be ready. But generally, you've gotten off to a good start. Like I said, welcome the opportunity to continue this evening or to adjourn and come back a week away.
What's the pleasure of the council?
I'm okay with going a little longer.
I'm for adjourning. I don't feel that great.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
So, tell you, look,